He tours the country, drinks the tea, and tickles the toddlers.
Given the fact that there's so many other things in other parts of the world and the Commonwealth and everything else, so trying to get round everything, as you can imagine, is always a bit of a challenge.
First stop on the current tour is Nantgarw, outside Cardiff, where there are moves afoot to welcome the prince.
I think it's your right leg behind your left.
I'm so excited.
This is the National Call Centre for the Prince's Trust, where they handle 6,000 calls a month, helping young people.
Engineers, so they're looking to take part in our coaching course. So this is a live chat service.
Oh, it's so wonderful to be able to help you.
It's lovely.
You are good. Well done.
Thank
Great
you.
example.
Thank you.
Next up is a 100-mile journey to North Wales. And a reunion with someone Charles last met half a century ago.
How are you?
Great pleasure. Well, I'm still alive, as you can see, just.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
And me. I met you on the 2nd of July, like this, in Blaenau-Ffestiniog.
Yes, a very long time ago.
Yes, and it's a long time ago. Still got the
You
sash.
still got it. It's fantastic.
I've also got the dress and the coats, but it will only fit one leg.
I know, but this is my great problem too. If there's any concentration. How
Bit
wonderful.
wide on the beam.
Pleasure to see you.
And you.
It's so marvellous.
Lovely to meet you again.
Maybe we ought to have a gathering of all the hostesses.
Yes. Yeah, well,
You never know.
got pictures of them all.
Oh, you have?
Yes.
Aged 22, Lorwena Williams won a competition in 1969 to greet the prince.
I didn't expect for 1 second that he would stop and talk to me. And he did. I'll always remember. But age takes over. As Prince Charles admitted himself to me, that both of us were a bit wider on the beam. We have been. Yeah, it was very exciting then, and it's exciting today. Lovely to meet him and repeat it after 50 years. I can't believe 50 years.
Half a century ago, 20-year-old Charles was thinking deeply about the responsibility of becoming Prince of Wales.
It is rather anachronistic and out of place in this world, which is perhaps somewhat cynical. But I think it can mean quite a lot if one goes about it in the right way.
Charles's role was first made public with great fanfare, well ahead of time, at the Commonwealth Games in Cardiff in 1958.
What happier moment could have been chosen than the end of this inspiring week to announce to the Principality that it once again has its own prince.
For a shy 9-year-old schoolboy, there was no escape, and it would only get worse. Throughout the 1960s, Welsh nationalism was on the rise.
Wales is a very proud country. We're very proud of our heritage, our history, our language, and there are those that feel very strongly the investiture of Prince Charles was an imposition on this country of an English-born prince and taking the title of Prince of Wales, which of course hadn't been held by a Welshman since the 13th century.
By 1969, the year of the investiture, Wales was deeply divided. The old industries were dying, the language was under threat. Many felt trampled on and ignored.
You've been a messin' where you shouldn't have been a messin'. And now someone else is getting all your best. These boots are made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days these boots are gonna walk all over you.
To turn the tide of history and become a popular modern monarch, the so-called Playboy Prince would have to unite Wales. Yet being invested at Carnarvon in a lavish, televised global ceremony might only make things worse.
Ond mae rai chi gael protest i gael bob dim da chi isio, os da chi isio fo, rhaid chi protestio amdano fo rhai. Achos ydy hyn yn byd ond wast o arian ar y dre na chdi. Wast o arian dydy o'n byd i ni fel Cymru na chdi.
I remember going round different parts of Wales and, you know, being met by demonstrations and this sort of thing. And it was, you know, you didn't quite know what was going to happen.
A warning was sent to the prince. If he went to Carnarvon, he would be in grave danger.
In those days, you know, things like bombs went off and goodness knows what.
Little did Charles know how imminent that danger would be.
Message came through, a sniper was going to take a pot shot at Prince Charles at that time.
It's 1969, and two worlds are about to collide.
You say that you care if you say you love me madly, I gladly be there like a puppet on a string.
I was in the middle of my history degree at Cambridge. Arriving at Aberystwyth was, I think, probably more of a surprise and shock for everybody else, as I turned up with an awful lot of media, as you can imagine.
With only months to go before his investiture as Prince of Wales, Charles is embracing his inner Welshman. He's enrolled in the most Welsh of universities to immerse himself in the language and culture. It's a bid for acceptance.
University College, Aberystwyth, where, to the relief of the nation, Prince Charles was given a warm and very friendly welcome. The Prince, who on July the 1st becomes Prince of Wales, is taking a 9-week Welsh language and history course at the university. While he's at the university, Prince Charles will stay at Pantycelyn Hall of Residence. His next-door neighbour is a Welsh nationalist. Jokingly, the Prince remarked, "I hope he won't thump on the wall."
Doctoral student Rodri Evans has combed through the university archives. He's discovered how the presence of the heir to the throne whipped up a frenzy of protest.
Aberystwyth at the time was something of a hotbed of radicalism, be it radical nationalism. There were a number of CND activists. There was a Marxist society, students with Republican leanings. Certainly a sense that the somewhat conservative Charles would have found it difficult to mix with such a radical cohort of students.
Every day I had to go down into the town where I went to these lectures, and most days there seemed to be a demonstration going on against me. The counter-demonstration, usually by splendid middle-aged ladies who got out of a bus. Anyway, that was an interesting experience.
It wasn't just the older ladies going weak at the knees.
O'n i'n sylwi hefyd bod y merched ymlith y myfyrwyr yn rhoi croeso mawr iddo fod nawr. A chi'n meddwl y bydd o falle yn cael mwy o hwyl gyda'r merched na rai o'n o'ch chi?
Wel, fi'n credu yn i ateb y cwestiwn yna, mae'r car yw'r dynfa fwyaf. Y merched yn licio sports car.
This is the language laboratory, where, under the expert tuition of Mr. Edward Millward, Prince Charles hopes to master the intricacies and pronunciations of Welsh.
I did my utmost to learn as much as I could, but in a term it's quite difficult, and I'm not as brilliant a linguist as I'd like to be.
To get away from the chaos on campus, the 20-year-old prince took long mountain walks. His love for the Welsh landscape was born.
I remember one day exploring a bit of wonderfully remote mid-Wales, which is magical countryside and relatively empty, and I got completely lost. And I had this chance to explore. I rather fell in love with a lot of the Welsh countryside. I learned an awful lot about Wales in the process.
Charles couldn't stay in the hills forever. The clock was ticking down to the ceremony that would change his life.
Well, in 1969, I was a detective sergeant at Dagenham. The phone rang and someone said, the Detective Chief Superintendent wants to speak to you, Len. And his name was Jolly Jack Wiesner. First words he said to me were, Len, are you Welsh? So I said, well, what do you want to know for? He said, they're looking for a Detective Sergeant First Class to be a team leader down in Carnarvon at the investiture of the Prince of Wales. And I thought, wow, there's a chance to take part in history.
It was interesting because in the run-up to the investiture, there was a lot of you could imagine, as always, toing and froing, shouting and screaming.
We were there because there was a real threat to the royal party, including Prince Charles. They wanted us to look out for these Welsh nationalists and snap the problem in the bud wherever possible.
Carnarvon never seen anything like it, really. There'd been rehearsals with the Household Cavalry, soldiers galore, carriages, so everybody'd been out at the crack of dawn to watch these processions in rehearsals. So there was a huge sort of expectation building up as to how it was going to be.
Derek Jones, a local Boy Scout, was picked to run errands inside the castle.
My mum made sure everything was perfect for me for the day. The shoes were cleaned, clean trousers, clean shirt, everything ironed and pressed. The whole purpose of Boy Scouts was to be runners. So if anybody where we were sitting during the investiture wanted a glass of water, pass a note or a message to somebody, we used to just put it in an envelope and we used to run with it.
It was a tremendous atmosphere. People were happy.
Especially on the day, I mean, there seemed to be a lot of people around all being very cheerful on the whole. And it was a remarkable occasion, which I shall never forget.
It was amazing. It was here in our town, and this old castle that stood here for so many hundreds of years, bedecked with amazing finery and bunting, and we were right in the middle of it.
Choreographed by my uncle-in-law, Lord Snowdon, with all those splendid 1960s, red chairs, which some people have still got.
I walked along the red carpet and this guardsman grabbed hold of me, picked me up, because he was something like, felt like about 7'6", but he wasn't. Picked me up, dropped me somewhere else, got the hoover out and hoovered the carpet back into its place. But no one was supposed to go on the red carpet. Who did? Me.
Around the castle, a crowd of nearly 100,000 were gathering, and the police were on the lookout for troublemakers.
I think the aim was to employ Welsh-speaking detectives. Well, there wasn't enough to go around, and I think they settled for half Welsh-speaking detectives and half detectives with Welsh names. There were several innovations that I'd never come across before. One was the use of personal radios. We looked a bit like FBI agents with the earpiece and the light max. And the other thing was, just like a bird book, you had these albums, and in it were photographs of all the Welsh national suspects who were possible troublemakers. They almost wore a uniform, you know, a drab anorak type thing, and you'd know. The idea was, if one was spotted, you could whip it out and you could identify the bloke. You could then look for him, spot him, and then pay particular attention to him. We would come up one on either side and then close in, and then they'd be fully aware that they had two big blokes either side of them. And then it was conveyed to them mentally, physically, and verbally that their presence was no longer required and that they should leave if they wanted to leave under their own steam. The crowd was made up of two distinct elements. The Welsh patriots, and they were cheering the Queen, and particularly the Prince of Wales, to the rafters. The others, the Welsh nationalists, made it clear that they had a distinct dislike for the royal family, and the royal family should off and leave Wales.
Discordant note there. Just a few boos among the chairs.
Other forms of protest included a number of individuals giving the procession the V sign as they went past. There was another case of eggs being thrown at the royal carriage and towards the Queen.
A modern prince in a medieval castle kneeling before the Queen, who was fulfilling a promise and giving Wales a worthy prince for its own, in a manner set...
It appeared to be very emotional when she finally started the actual ceremony of crowning him, doing the cloak and wrapping that around. It was a mother-son moment, I think.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship. And faith and truth I will bear unto thee, to live and die against all manner of folks.
An interesting experience, whether I could remember what I had to say, and also whether that that sort of crown would stay on. You know? It wasn't very comfortable. You know, all those sort of horrors you tend to have on occasions like that.
Then, boom. Those of us that knew what an explosion sounded like knew that it was an explosion. We knew that there was a real threat and there was potential there for danger.
Now, what we're looking at now is an incident of some kind. I heard an explosion. We thought that one of the guns had gone off accidentally. There could just possibly have been an explosion.
Mae'n gyffrous dros ben. I find it very moving. His youth and his modest bearing, it's a good combination.
There then came a serious message came through. When Prince was presented to the Welsh people outside the castle, a sniper was going to take a pot shot at Prince Charles at that time. We immediately moved into the square and we took steps to clear everybody from the balconies so that we cleared the vantage point that may have been available.
My father's house was searched, mother and father's house was searched. Though all the police and guards and all the other people were there, but there was still that threat. They must have been very, very worried about something going wrong.
I felt we'd done our job and we had taken part in history. I'm still not sure how much of the information we was given was a real threat, but we treated it as a real threat.
Only when the royal party was gone was it revealed that 2 Welsh nationalists were dead, killed early that morning by their own bomb in a failed attack. The prince was no longer in danger. His lasting relationship with Wales could begin. It was time to put down some roots.
It just seemed to me to be wonderful to have somewhere in Wales to base myself, which would indicate, as much interest and concern for people in Wales as I possibly could.
And the place Charles chose was this run-down farmhouse. We're about to be given access into his personal home.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
In the beautiful landscape of mid-Wales is a simple farm building that's rarely been filmed. It's the first time an heir to the throne has actually owned a house in Wales. Finding the right Welsh place for a royal residence has been no easy task.
It just seemed to me to be wonderful to have somewhere in Wales to base myself. Trouble is, it really took 40 years to find anywhere. I tried, but somehow, I don't know, nothing seemed to work or come about. And in the end, after a lot of searching, we found this place. It's a marvelous way of, connecting with local people and the local farming community when I can and that sort of thing. And I've done what I can, with the wildflower meadows and things, trying to encourage the pollinating insects. So, they're around the house now and have gradually got more and more interesting. So I've planted a lot of trees and put in, the odd hedgerow and all this sort of thing. now after 10 years or more, it's beginning suddenly to look a bit more as it should. So, I don't know, I hope I've done a little bit for this little tiny corner of Wales to enhance it.
The house is about as far from a palace as it is possible to be. Prince Charles has created his own green paradise.
It's the ultimate DIY project, really, and also somewhere which could be termed as a bolt hole. So the name Llyn y Wyrmod translates into English as the Grove of Wormwood, which is an ancient herb that used to grow on the estate. It had been untouched for a very long time. All of the lime wash had disappeared. There were slurry pits and corrugated barns. It took the prince's vision to kind of imagine what this space could look like.
Even the royal flock is doing their best to help.
The building was insulated with sheep's wool, and it was lime washed outside. All of this really was in an effort to make it sustainable, to make it one with the landscape.
Many of the furnishings have been upcycled, including the ultimate royal hand-me-down.
This dresser was given by the ladies of Meirionydd, which is up in northwest Wales. It was given to the Queen when she was princess on her marriage in 1947. One of the great features are the rugs, and that was one of the design elements that the Duchess of Cornwall in particular was very keen to celebrate. And it's very different to the other royal properties in Britain, and it's a great homage to the craftspeople of previous generations.
I've tried as hard as I can to encourage people to remember and to develop, you know, the timeless nature of their culture and tradition.
Cue an unexpected call to Solver Mill, a tiny family-run textiles business in Pembrokeshire.
We had an inquiry from a design company to weave some floor rugs. And then one of the assistants dropped into the conversation about the Prince of Wales, and I was like, I'm sorry, did you say the Prince of Wales? And she said, oh yeah, these rugs are for his new Welsh home, and he'd very much like to have some of your flooring in it. And I was like, what, Prince of Wales wants some of our flooring? Yes, she said, yes, that's okay, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, that's absolutely fine, lovely, thank you very much. This here is actually the pattern that we wove for him, so it's called a Welsh check pattern, and these are the two colours. So we did a floor rug for his, for the entrance hall, where he meets and greets people when he's entertaining, and then we also did this floor rug, which was for his private quarters in Llyn Wyrmwood.
The prince wasn't going to pass up an opportunity to hone his craft skills. He took himself along to try weaving himself.
Tom said, do you want to have a go? And he went, oh, yes, thank you very much, I'd love to. So Tom had to make sure to tell him to stand in the right place, just in case one of the shuttles came out, which would have been a disaster. He was a bit tentative to begin with, but once he got into it, he loved it. I think he could have stayed there all day, actually, watching the shuttle flying backwards and forwards. And then he came back through into the shop, and then we sat and had Welsh cakes, sparrowbreath and tea with them, which was unbelievably surreal. So this is the letter that His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales sent to us. Reading it again is, yeah, it's made me really emotional, actually, to listen to his message. Every day I lament the demise of the traditional craft skills people possess in our country and the loss of traditional methods of production. I do believe such skills and methods are timeless, truly sustainable and invaluable, and it is imperative that we do not forget our local stories and identity. Charles.
Those were the days, my friend, we thought they'd never end. We'd sing and dance forever and
The prince's empathy with these local stories and identity began back in 1969, in the days following his investiture.
Wales. There was a welcome on the hillside, a welcome in the dale. Wherever he went, there were tumultuous greetings for the Prince of Wales.
The thing I shall never forget was the 3 days after the investiture, when I drove all the way around large parts of Wales and the South Wales and through all the valleys. And I've never seen so many people in my life. People were so incredibly friendly and enthusiastic. It was remarkable, I remember. Driving through all those communities, particularly in South Wales, it was extraordinary. All those incredible people who somehow remain so resilient despite, the closure of all the mines and all the difficulties and challenges and agonies that so many of them have had.
Charles was encountering South Wales in the shadow of Britain's greatest post-war disaster. Three years before the Prince's investiture, the coal tip above the South Wales village of Aberfan collapsed, engulfing local houses and the junior school. A 116 children and 28 adults died. A generation was wiped out in minutes.
I lost a cousin in the disaster. If he hadn't been at home that morning, he would have been all right, but fate. Well, I was desperate to phone out of the hospital. Couldn't get through from any phone in Aberfan, not that we had phones then. It was a kiosk on the main road, but we were frantic. We just didn't know where he was. Then went over then with my father then to try and dig out. We were there all night, all the weekend. Then they found Brian on the Sunday morning. And, sorry, I can't say any more.
I was at school, I think, and we were all horrified by it. Like that such a tragedy could occur on such a scale. That was the really frighteningly awful thing about it. And with the whole school. We all felt, you can imagine, so deeply for all those people who had suffered so much in losing their loved ones.
Charles has carried the memory of the tragedy since boyhood. As Prince of Wales, he has embraced Aberfan as a personal cause.
I went to visit and met so many of these wonderful people and the families, and I had a fascinating conversation with so many of them. And again, their remarkable resilience is truly extraordinary, I think.
50th year of the disaster, Prince Charles paid a visit to the Aberfan Community Centre.
Charles is a supporter of the Aberfan Young Wives Club. The women of the village have met every week since the disaster. Aberfan is just the other side of the Brecon Beacons, from the Prince's home.
I have a party here every year when I come for quite a lot of the locals and the neighbours and everything else. And it's always a marvellous opportunity to catch up with everybody.
We were invited up to Llyn y Wermod in the July. Got up there eventually because we couldn't find the place. Had a drink now, served now, champagne. So I thought, oh, very nice, drinking the champagne. I thought, oh, this is going to last me all night now, I thought, with this glass. Sat down, and next thing, it was coming from pouring everywhere. I thought, my word, we're really enjoying ourselves. We were invited to go outside in his garden, his private garden, and we all had a photograph outside of the garden. Very privileged, and he was very nice to us. Thoroughly enjoyed the evening, and it was such a lovely evening, and of course we were coming back over the Brecon Beacons. It was superb.
The warmth of Welsh life has also touched the Duchess of Cornwall. Her husband's passion for Wales is infectious.
It's a sense of community. Because a lot of these villages are very remote, I think that the way people pull together and help each other, I think he sees that.
Yet throwing his lot in with the locals will propel the prince outside his comfort zone. While he's almost one of the locals, some duties don't come quite so naturally. To a Prince of Wales more at home in a wildflower meadow than the front row of a scrum.
The good old rugby club in all these places. The Llandovery Rugby Club here. I'm very proud to be the patron.
The heartbeat of the community, Llandovery Rugby Club, there's no doubt about that.
Charles, who didn't much enjoy rugby at Gordonston, has become an unlikely sporting champion.
We're the only Welsh rugby club to have Prince Charles as our patron, and it's put Llandovery on the map, definitely. We've had a lot of success since he has become our royal patron.
As Prince of Wales, you can't shy away from the national sport. Charles has developed an affinity with the game by finding his own special way into it.
Llandovery, we invited all our teams, and they all lined up. He spoke to me in the stand and he said, "My word, do I have to speak to all those?" And his question to them was, "How many of you are in farming? Are you beef, sheep or dairy?" To be honest, I think he's very interested in agriculture, more than rugby, to be honest.
Wonderful characters. A lot of them are farmers' sons and throwing hay bales around and sheep and things like that most of the time, I suspect.
It'd be nice to hear Prince Charles speak a bit more Welsh. That would make him a real Welshman, but I think he's at ease in Llandovery.
That's for you. Thank you very much. I wish you a very, very happy 100th birthday. I think what he really enjoys is the peace and the quiet, and it's sort of very stress-free. You come here and you can relax. I would entirely agree with him.
On the last day of his Welsh tour, the Prince is making a very personal visit. Back in 1969, he was created Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Regiment of Wales. The courage and sacrifice of all soldiers and their loved ones is very dear to him. Charles is asked to stop by at a simple farmhouse in a remote part of Snowdonia.
Speak loud to me because I can't hear very well.
I'll try my best.
After the kids.
And I'll raise the volume a bit.
Up until a few years ago, 90-year-old Gerald Williams was still living in the house.
I remember years ago visiting a wonderful old farmer back in 1969.
That's a long time ago.
I know, but he was exactly like this. Did you manage to live in here on the whole without it getting too cold in the winter?
Oh yes.
It was all right.
It wasn't cold when you were up here. You're acclimatised, don't you?
No, I know. Because I remember drinking.
Gerald's uncle, a hero of Wales, was raised here. He was the celebrated World War I poet Hedd Wyn. In the summer of 1917, Hedd Wyn stole away from army camp to help with the harvest on the family farm. For that, he was called a deserter, punished by the British authorities, and sent directly to the front at Passchendaele.
He was conscripted to go to war, wasn't he? He didn't go there of his own accord, and he was just a young man here from out in the country here. And because he was a deserter, he was in the first push. And he was killed the second day. Yeah.
You think that something like 40,000 Welshmen were killed during the First World War? And I mean, even from here, Trosvanydd, how many? Some 30 or 40 from here were killed. These remarkable people who were called up found themselves in this hell of a maelstrom in Flanders. And of course, his name, Hedd Wyn, really means blessed peace. That's the ultimate irony of all this. So it's been wonderful for me just to have a chance to to come and make a small pilgrimage here, if you see what I mean, to the house of this truly remarkable man in the great tradition of Welsh poets.
The Prince's pilgrimage marks half a century since the newly invested Charles first opened his heart to the Welsh.
For me, it's a way of officially dedicating one's life or part of one's life to Wales.
Charles inherited a divisive role, but has brought people together.
Prince Charles, he recognises what's crucially important to Wales. And I think that shows in his efforts to build an affinity with Wales and its people, and I think he's tried very hard to do that.
The man they once tried to bomb has won over a nation. After 50 years of being the longest-serving Prince of Wales in history, there is still the next role to come.
By being here for that period, it did make an enormous difference to my understanding of the way Wales works. And I mean, what I did pick up, I think particularly, was the immense sense of real community. It is a wonderful mosaic that I think makes the Principality so special.
Who'd do anything to prevent there even being a Prince of Wales.
Now, what we're looking at now is an incident of some kind.
Then, boom. From that moment on, we knew that there was a real threat.
This is the inside story of how Charles struggled against the odds to become the longest-serving prince of the country he loves.
It's the culture, it's the landscape, it's the people.
I just always want to leave something, I hope, better behind than perhaps there was when I came.
The title Prince of Wales has been given to the heir to the throne for the best part of a millennium, serving a proud and ancient land that's had a love-hate relationship with the crown. There's been years of harmony, and sometimes there's been clashes. Prince Charles has spent the last 50 years doing his bit for Wales.